Witchblade returns with a relaunch that's back to basics. It's a retelling of Sara Pezzini's origin, and we're going to talk about it. Witchblade is a fascinating property. It has a long history dating back to Top Cow, and of course also Image Comics. It's also one of the 90s outings, and it bears those hallmarks. The first issue of Witchblade was published in November of 1995. Witchblade is fascinating because it's something that some people know nothing about, while others know about it from various different avenues, because it's been adapted a lot of different ways. You had things like the live-action movie or TV series starring Yancey Butler from the early 2000s.
Sara Pezzini, a New York City detective, drawn into a chance encounter with a supernatural weapon.
You had the anime from 2006.
Sought by the greed of men since the dawn of humankind, but only bestowed upon the women whose fate it forever scars.
Then there was also the manga series. The American Witchblade also kept going and has had various eras and creators and some other attempts at relaunches. This 2024 endeavor is a hard reset. So it's presented as both a love letter to long-term fans, with the first issue being dedicated to the late Michael Turner, who was one of Witchblade's creators and some feel the best artist she ever had. It's simultaneously presented as a jumping on point for people who know nothing, so it's a fine line to walk. So the question is, does it pull it off? Let's find out. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, let's talk about Witchblade. This isn't the new one, but I have the compendium and I so rarely get to hold it up. The new one I have a digital copy currently, but this older 1990s one is relevant. Since this comic has such a clear mission statement, it's important to outline the direction I came into this with. I'm someone who has read a decent amount of 90s Witchblade, not all of it, but a lot of it. We covered the first issue on this channel a while back. So personally, I was definitely comparing and contrasting the two as I was reading, balancing the new with the old and imagining what it would be like coming into this one knowing nothing at all. So that's where I wanted to start from. What if this was your first encounter with Witchblade? You just saw the cool Mark Silvestri cover and decided to check it out. We're gonna approach it like that first and then do some light comparing and contrasting at the end. So be forewarned, spoilers, some light spoilers. Witchblade #1 was written by Marguerite Bennett, with art by Giuseppe Cafaro and colors by Arif Prianto. It is very much an origin issue in all forms. It starts off setting up a hook with soon-to-be Witchblade, Sara Pezzini. My name is Sara Pezzini. In 1 hour, I'm going to die. I'll contain most of my comparisons to the end, but there's an Easter egg on this first page that I could not point out. Double negative. The one picture they have centered that she's looking at is Jackie Estacado, aka The Darkness. And yes, for those wondering, they're also doing a new Darkness series in 2025. But Witchblade first. It's only fair because The Darkness / Jackie Estacado did debut in Witchblade. Issue number 10. This 2020 series does not bury the lead. It does not make you wait till the end for Witchblade. Once more, it seems to be balancing the assumption that many coming into this will be familiar with her and others will have seen the cover. So on the next page, we get to see Sara as the Witchblade. So the rest of the issue is more a how did we get to this point kind of story. In 59 minutes, my body will cease to be mine. I'm going to become something new. We're then taken to 9 hours ago. This issue wants, nay needs you to keep track of time. We go back here to introduce Kenneth Irons, who is positioned as one of the big bads for this series. He's hunting the Witchblade and has been for some time. This issue is then going to intercut between this hunt for the Witchblade as it hops from host to host and back to Sara as she details her backstory, as well as her motivations leading up to the sting that she's about to go into. Overall, this isn't a very dialogue-heavy issue. It's quite succinct in the way it conveys information and balances a lot with the art. Sometimes you'll have moments where the art's just left alone to tell the story entirely. However, there is one section that could have benefited from the addition of some editor's notes in the form of translation. For a period in this issue, Kenneth Irons is in Germany, and the Witchblade attaches itself to a female German host. This happens at the dig site. Her dialogue, while minimal, is written in German. On the one hand, this is a very nice and authentic touch, and much of the vibe of what is happening can be inferred through context and is aided by the art. You can follow it. However, it would have packed more of a punch if the reader, most of whom most likely will be English speakers or not overly familiar with German, could have read what was being said, even if it was in translation boxes. I can read a tiny bit of German, normally not enough to be even worth discussing, but there is a difference between being able to read and understand what is happening right away, and that would have been aided with those little translation boxes for people who can't read anything at all, because then you can see things like the fact that the character is begging. She's saying bite, bite, which is please, please. The scene hits a lot harder right away when one can read what is being said, because then you're getting the emotional impact right there. The translation boxes, they would still be right there in that moment with the image. And lack of understanding on the reader's part is not part of the story, which can sometimes be the case. Other sequences I had to stop and search out and translate. Now this may be a me thing, but I always like to know what is being said in the dialogue right then in that moment. So for me, this decision broke the flow of the narrative. Now mileage will vary. Some won't deem this necessary at all. Some won't even feel that it breaks the flow, as the art and context do convey it, or they may be happy to wait until the end to go look it up. Others may feel that that would have cluttered up the panel, although I would argue they're all quite large. There would be space since the lines aren't long, while others don't feel that subtitling or translation texts are necessary at all. That's a whole other discussion though, but it will factor into some's impressions of this moment. You can let me know where you land on all that down below. A lot of this first issue is dedicated to point-blank expositing as to who Sara is and why. Her history and motivation laid bare. Now for many, this may read as a tad clunky. Now this is one of the moments where the fact that I had read the first issue from the 90s, I couldn't put it aside, because this is exactly how Sara exposited in that first issue. What she is talking about was different, and her personality was a bit less cold, and she had a few more jokes and the like, but the cadence is the same. So for me, this read as homage rather than overly blunt, but for others it may feel inorganic or too direct. Miles will vary. Sara here is jaded. She's seeking revenge for the murder of her father, and she's also seen some things. She's a veteran, she can handle herself. So we already know all this about her as she heads into the sting operation. She's there seeking out the worst of the worst, human traffickers. It's at this moment where the plots are going to intersect. But before that, there's one of the strongest moments in this issue, wherein Sara begins to detail the relationship she has with her body in regards to the attachment she's had to perform from mind, soul, and body because of her history. To others, your body is a commodity. They may imprison it, objectify it, dismember it, destroy it. Your body is a tool, perhaps the greatest physical tool you'll ever have, but it's not all you are. You are what you have thought with that body, felt with that body, done with that body, that tool that does and does not define you. This is a really powerful speech in its own right, and there's a lot to think about and unpack there. It speaks subtly to Sara's femininity and her relationship with her body through that lens, which is paramount also to the themes of Witchblade. Her being female is integral to this series. It's pivotal to the overall Witchblade lore, and this also sets up the relationship she's going to have with the Witchblade in this series, some of the struggle of her body being altered and changed. It could also play a large role if they decide to revisit some older plots. Darkness Coma Baby, if you know, you know. It's working through a lot of things, and in regards to Witchblade, a character so often identified by her body, it adds some nice layers onto what they've already established about Sara's personality in this run, while also not taking any shots at the past or talking down to it. Of course, we were shown Sara getting the Witchblade early on, so that's not a surprise, but now it gets more elaborate. We get to see how she feels as it bonds with her. And after some more events, this issue ends setting up that she's been seen by Ian Nottingham, which if you read the 90s series, it's Nottingham. This first issue also comes with a nice sketch gallery where you can see some of the Mark Silvestri early redesigns. It's very cool, very pointy, very species. If you're interested in behind the scenes things, this is a nice little addition. Also, you get the variants, which as one can imagine for Witchblade, go pretty hard. There's also a write-up at the end with a nice dedication from Silvestri to Turner, and it also details the process. I'll read a bit of the Turner dedication because it's nice. And finally, we wish to dedicate this book to the great Michael Turner, a man whose artistry and spirit set the bar for all that followed, and whose life and talent were taken from us far too soon. With gratitude, Mark Silvestri, dedicated to Michael Turner. So how does this issue straddle that line between the old and the new? Firstly, the new. This is a very well structured and formulated origin issue. It does everything it needs to. It provides the hook early on and presents one of Sara's struggles, the ownership of her body and destiny right off the bat. It explains who Sara is quite thoroughly and sets up the mystery of the Witchblade. What is it? Why do people want it? But it also shows you some of the things that it can do. You get to see it in action, so you get to see that it's cool and dangerous, if the design works for you, that is. It does cut through a man's head trying to get to Sara. Also, it establishes the tone for this series. It's going to be a bit grittier and a bit darker. But for this time period, it's on par pretty much with everything going on time of recording. It doesn't stand out in that regard as, say, it might have a bit more in the 90s. Or maybe not that stood out, but there's just a different kind of edge to 90s grit compared to 2024 grit. This issue is definitely beginner friendly. It doesn't pressure you to have prior knowledge and has things that could get new readers interested. One of the things that could be said is at times some of the panels do feel a bit empty, like there's a lot of space left that could be played with. It must be known that some of that may be coming from the comparisons I couldn't help making in my mind to the first 90s issue, because I am aware of it. So even putting it aside, sometimes those comparisons would creep up. But on the whole, this issue on its own does everything it needs to. There's just a tonal difference that happens over time time as styles change. In the 90s, more was more. More word bubbles, more details on every piece of art in the room, more boobs. So the choices and changes made between these issues are deliberate, and some of it's going to come down to a matter of taste. Again, for those who are even familiar with the earlier Witchblade, which not everybody will be. All of this leads us nicely into the what about the past front. How is it for people who are familiar with those past Witchblades? From that perspective, it's still very strong. There are little Easter eggs. The main characters are present. You get to see new versions of Michael and Irons and Nottingham. The Witchblade design has been updated but is still familiar and retains its sex appeal, which is a part of the character, while fitting it into a more 2020s aesthetic. It's less boob cups and thong and more painted on synth-skin battle armor. Most importantly, there's a clear love for Witchblade here. It's present in everything. In the letter by Silvestri, it details the dedication and genesis of this book, and discusses Bennett specifically being quite familiar with and a fan of the character, and it does show. Some of the scenes here are straight up remixes of scenes from the very first issue, but there's also some very thought-provoking new elements seated inside of it. So it is very interesting from a compare and contrast perspective, but it's also fun just on its own as a standout issue not doing that. Let me know if you want to compare and contrast, because there are some very interesting differences and some things that each does better than the other. They each have their own strengths. Another thing to consider is that there are different iterations of Witchblade over time, so it will be interesting to see how this lands for people comparing it not necessarily back to the 90s, but to different starting points or different relaunches. Hence, depending upon where one is coming from, this may feel quite different, or how differential it's being to the first ever issue may pass unnoticed. As far as being a restart point, it's a very solid outing. The question is, though, if it's going to get you interested. So I want to hear from you. All of those are just my thoughts. Now I want to hear yours. Do you like Witchblade? Were you familiar with her? Have you read this relaunch, or did this get you interested? Not interested? How are you feeling? Your thoughts, I want to hear them. Please share them down below. And while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking this time today spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye. Got to take one of the tomes off the shelf. Today is a good day. See you again soon. Bye-bye.